Welcome everyone, I'm Dale and this is Cinema Historia. A missing Norman king, a heroic Saxon knight, and an evil prince. This week we're going back to 1952 for a historical adventure film called Ivanhoe, starring Robert Taylor, Elizabeth Taylor, Joan Fontaine, and George Saunders, and this is directed by Richard Thorpe. Our story begins this week in the 12th century, at the close of the Third Crusade to free the Holy Land. England's warrior king, Richard the Lion-Hearted, had disappeared during his homeward march, vanishing without trace, mourned to be dead. One of his knights, the Saxon Wilfred of Ivanhoe, played by Robert Taylor, takes on a private crusade of his own, finally finding him held by Leopold of Austria for the enormous ransom of 150,000 marks of silver. Richard's treacherous brother, Prince John, knows about it but does nothing, enjoying ruling in his absence. Back in England while traveling, Ivanhoe, pretending to be a minstrel, meets Sir Brian du Bois-Guilbert, played by George Saunders, and Sir Hugh de Bracy, two of Prince John's Norman supporters. When the Norman party seeks shelter for the night, Ivanhoe leads them to Rutherwood, the home of his father Cedric the Saxon. Cedric welcomes the knights coldly, offering food and shelter, while Ivanhoe sneaks into the chambers of the woman he loves, Lady Rowena, played by Joan Fontaine. Soon after, Ivanhoe pleads with Cedric to aid in raising the ransom to free Richard, but Cedric will not help a Norman. When Ivanhoe leaves with his squire Wamba, the two men rescue Isaac of York, another guest of Cedric's, from two Norman soldiers. Shaken, Isaac decides to return to Sheffield, and Ivanhoe and Wamba escort him there. There, Isaac's daughter, Rebecca, played by Elizabeth Taylor, hearing of the ransom, gives Ivanhoe her jewels to buy a horse and armor for an important jousting tournament at Ashby. Prince John's intention is to use the tournament to demonstrate to the Saxons the futility of resisting his Norman rule. Ivanhoe shows up as a mysterious Saxon knight, arrayed all in black, defeating Malvisa, Vipa, Front de Boeuf, one after the other. In the last bout against Gilbert, Ivanhoe bests him, however, injured and bleeding severely, falls from his horse. So does Ivanhoe have a new love that comes to his aid of recovery? Are Cedric and Lady Rowena captured and held hostage in a Norman castle, or is the ransom finally amassed as a wager of battle surrounds the castle? Released July 31st, 1952, our story is based on the 1819 historical novel Ivanhoe by Scottish novelist, poet, and historian Sir Walter Scott. With a 79% rating from the film critic Rotten Tomatoes, this film was MGM's biggest earner for 1952 and one of the top 4 moneymakers of the year, also the 4th most popular film in England that year. This film earned 9 nominations and 2 Photoplay Award wins in 1952, including Best Pictures of the Month and Most Popular Female Star for Elizabeth Taylor. And I did another George Saunders film, Son of Fury from 1952, a great adventure film. Please click the link below and enjoy. And our trivia question this week, was there a real expert archer in our film? Was there a real expert archer in our film? So a little more history and the answer to our trivia question coming up next. Since a jousting tournament is a big part of our film story, it is also the subject of this week's history. So, jousting is a medieval and Renaissance martial sport in which two opponents, typically armored knights on horseback, charge each other with lances. Knights wore heavy armor, including specialized rigid suits and fixed helmets, and their horses were also armored on the head and neck. The knight could charge up to 30 miles an hour, aiming to break their lances on the opponent's shield or helmet, unhorse them, or score points for good hits. The sport, which developed from military training, became a prestigious display and entertainment for the elite, though it was also dangerous and oftentimes deadly. The first recorded reference to a jousting tournament was in 1066, the same year as the Battle of Hastings and the Norman conquest of England. Within a century, they had become so widespread that a series of regulations were established, limiting the number of jousts that could be held, lest the king's armies be otherwise occupied when an actual conflict arose. These tournaments, like all courtly celebrations, were highly formal events requiring nobles to obtain a royal permit. By the 14th century, many members of the nobility, including kings, had taken up jousting to showcase their own courage, skills, and talents, and the sport proved to be just as dangerous for a king as a knight. The most famous royal jousting fatality was King Henry II of France, June 30th, 1559. While participating in a joust to celebrate the marriage of his daughter to the King of Spain, he received a fatal wound when a sliver of his opponent's lance broke off and pierced him in the eye, a significant role in the decline of jousting as a sport. The development of firearms and muskets in the 16th century greatly diminished the role of the military knight and the importance of jousting as a form of combat training. Competitive jousting soon fell out of favor, and the sport evolved into more of a court spectacle for entertainment. By the middle of the 17th century, traditional jousting tournaments were a thing of the past, though some traces of the sport continued in Europe. The ring tilt, in which men on horseback prove their accuracy with lances and suspended rings, remained popular in the United States, and this form of jousting was named the state sport of Maryland in 1962. Interesting. And the answer to our trivia question this week: was there a real expert archer in our film? Yes, there was. One of the archers shooting from the walls of the Warwick Castle is Jack Churchill, a World War II veteran. Jack Churchill was a British Army officer nicknamed Fighting Jack Churchill and Mad Jack, fought in the Second World War with a basket-hilted Scottish broadsword and a set of bagpipes. An expert archer who carried a sword and longbow into battle, in 1940 notched an arrow into his longbow, fired at a soldier and killed him, making him the last British soldier on record to have done so. Jack also has an uncredited role in A Yank at Oxford with Robert Taylor in 1938 and The Thief of Baghdad in 1940. In a quick note, this film was partially filmed on location at Doune Castle in Scotland, and I'll be doing the history on the castle when I do the film Monty Python and the Holy Grail from 1975. Pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.